The morning of October 14, 1962, began like any other Monday at the FBI's Washington field office on Pennsylvania Avenue. Special Agent Thomas Garrett sat in the crammed surveillance room on the fourth floor, headphones pressed against his ears, listening to the monotonous hiss of static from wiretap station Echo 7. He was 31 years old, a Yale graduate who joined the Bureau 4 years earlier with dreams of catching Soviet spies. Instead, he spent most days cataloging mundane phone conversations between suspected sympathizers who turned out to be nothing more than academics with progressive views. But at 9:47 a.m., everything changed. Charlie Victor 9 to Eagle's Nest. Package secured. Repeat. Package secured. Extraction window, 72 hours. The voice was female, calm, speaking English with a nearly perfect American accent. But Garrett's trained ear caught the microscopic hesitation before certain consonants, the barely perceptible softening of hard vowels. Eastern European, possibly Ukrainian or Russian. Garrett's hand shot to the recording switch, his heart hammering. This was it. Real tradecraft. Real espionage. Within minutes, the cryptanalysis team identified the transmission's origin, a pay phone near DuPont Circle, just blocks from the Soviet embassy. The Bureau's technical surveillance team had been monitoring suspected dead-drop locations throughout northwest Washington for 18 months, part of Operation Longhorn, a massive counterintelligence effort to identify and neutralize KGB operatives working under diplomatic cover. By noon, Assistant Director William Sullivan convened an emergency meeting in the secure conference room. 12 agents crowded around the mahogany table, cigarette smoke hanging thick in the air. Sullivan, a lean man with silver temples and eyes like flint, played the recording 3 times. We cross-referenced the voice print with our active surveillance files, he said, sliding a manila folder across the table. Mia Lena Volkov, known professionally as Helen Marsh. Age 32. Occupation: translator at the State Department's Eastern European desk. Immigrated from Canada in 1958. Became a U.S. citizen last year. Garrett studied the surveillance photographs clipped inside the folder. The woman was attractive but unremarkable. Shoulder-length brown hair, intelligent eyes, the kind of face that disappeared in the crowd. She wore modest dresses and sensible shoes. She looked like 1,000 other government secretaries. Her background check was clean, Sullivan continued. Too clean, as it turns out. Our Montreal field office just confirmed that Elena Volkov didn't exist before 1956. The Canadian immigration records were expertly forged. We believe she's a KGB illegal, a deep-cover agent with no official connection to Soviet diplomatic channels. The room fell silent. Illegals were the most dangerous type of Soviet operative, trained for years, embedded with false identities, living seemingly normal lives while collecting intelligence and running networks. They were also notoriously difficult to prosecute without ironclad evidence. We've had her under loose surveillance for 6 weeks, Sullivan said. Phone taps, mail covers, occasional physical surveillance. Nothing actionable until this morning. The phrase "package secured" suggests she recently obtained classified material. Extraction window means the KGB is planning to pull her out. Gentlemen, we have 72 hours to catch her in the act, or lose her forever. Garrett raised his hand. What's our legal standing? Can we arrest her now? Sullivan shook his head. Justice Department says no. We have a suspicious phone call, but no physical evidence of espionage. No stolen documents, no handler meetings, no confession. If we arrest her now, a smart lawyer gets her out in 24 hours, and she disappears. We need to catch her with the goods, or with her handler, so we watch and wait. Garrett said, exactly. Round-the-clock surveillance. 4-man rotating teams. I want to know everywhere she goes, everyone she talks to. If she sneezes, I want to know which direction the wind was blowing. That afternoon, Garrett found himself sitting in a parked Chevrolet on Connecticut Avenue, 3 cars behind Helen Marsh's modest Ford Falcon. She left her apartment in Georgetown at 2:15 p.m., drove to a pharmacy on M Street, then to a small medical office near George Washington University Hospital. Subject entering medical building. Garrett spoke quietly into his radio. 2400 Pennsylvania Avenue. Stand by. 40 minutes later, she emerged, walking slowly, one hand pressed against her abdomen. Her face looked pale, drawn. She sat in her car for nearly 10 minutes before starting the engine. "She looks sick," muttered Agent Kowalski, Garrett's surveillance partner. "Maybe she's legitimately ill." "Or maybe it's cover," Garrett replied. "We stay on her." But over the next 36 hours, a troubling pattern emerged. Helen Marsh went nowhere near any known Soviet contact points. She didn't visit parks where dead drops might be hidden. She didn't make suspicious phone calls. She didn't attend diplomatic receptions where she might brush past a handler. Instead, she went to doctors. Wednesday morning, Georgetown University Hospital, obstetrics department. Wednesday afternoon, another medical office in Bethesda. Thursday morning, back to the pharmacy, where she picked up prescriptions. Thursday afternoon, the hospital again, this time staying for 3 hours. "Something's wrong," Agent Morrison said during Thursday's evening briefing. "Either she's genuinely sick, or she knows we're watching and she's buying time." Sullivan leaned forward, his expression grim. "The medical officers won't tell us anything without a warrant, and we don't have ground for one. But I had our analyst run her prescription records through a contact at FDA. Gentlemen, Helen Marsh is pregnant, approximately 8 weeks." The room erupted in speculation. Sullivan held up his hand for silence. "This changes everything. Pregnant women get special treatment, more freedom of movement, more privacy, more sympathy. If she's smart, and we know she is, she'll use the condition to her advantage. Medical emergencies can't be questioned. Hospital security is complicated. And if we push too hard, we look like monsters persecuting an expectant mother." Garrett felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. "Sir, what if the pregnancy is a plan? What if she deliberately got pregnant to create an extraction opportunity?" Sullivan stared at him. "That would require remarkable calculation. These people are trained from childhood," Garrett said quietly. "The KGB selects illegals when they're teenagers. They spend years perfecting legends, learning languages, studying American culture. They're taught to sacrifice everything, friends, family, their own identities for the mission. Would pregnancy be too high a price?" The room fell silent again. "There's another possibility." Agent Parker spoke up. "What if she didn't know? What if she got pregnant by accident, and now she's desperate? A pregnant woman can't easily defect back to Moscow. The KGB might kill her rather than risk exposure. She might be trying to buy time to figure out her next move." Sullivan stubbed out his cigarette. "Either way, the clock is ticking. Her 72-hour extraction window closes Saturday night. That gives us less than 48 hours. If she makes a run for it, I want every possible exit locked down. Coordinate with State Department, Immigration, Coast Guard, and local police. Every airport, train station, bus terminal, and port within 200 miles gets her photograph. If she tries board anything that moves, I want to know about it." "What about the Soviet embassy?" Garrett asked. "Already covered. If she drives within 3 blocks of Embassy Row, we intercept. But I don't think she'll risk it. The Soviets know we watch that area constantly. They'll have a more creative exfiltration plan." That night, Garrett sat in his car outside Helen Marsh's apartment building, watching her silhouette move behind the third-floor curtains. She was alone, as far as they could tell. No visitors, no phone calls, no signals. Just a woman, pregnant and trapped, knowing that the most powerful law enforcement agency in the world was closing in. He thought about his own wife, and 6 months pregnant with their first child. He thought about the vulnerability of pregnancy, the fear, the need for protection. Then he forced himself to remember this wasn't some innocent civilian. This was a trained enemy agent who had spent years stealing American secrets, betraying her adopted country, potentially putting American lives at risk. But as he watched her shadow move slowly across the curtains, one hand resting on her belly in that universal gesture of maternal protection, he couldn't shake one disturbing question. What would a woman do to protect her unborn child? How far would she go? And how much of what they were about to witness would be performance? And how much would be real? Friday morning arrived gray and cold, rain spattering against the windows of the FBI surveillance van parked on 32nd Street. Inside the cramped vehicle, Special Agent Garrett nursed his fourth cup of bitter coffee, eyes fixed on the video monitor showing Helen Marsh's apartment entrance. At 6:47 a.m., she emerged, moving carefully down the steps, wearing a beige raincoat that couldn't quite conceal the subtle changes in her silhouette. Subject mobile, Garrett spoke into his radio, heading to vehicle. She drove east through the rain-slicked streets, but instead of heading toward her State Department office, she turned north. The surveillance team followed at a careful distance as she pulled into the emergency entrance of Georgetown University Hospital. "She's going into emergency," Agent Morrison reported from the follow car. "Repeat, emergency room entrance." Garrett's pulse quickened. "All units stand by. Could be our extraction point." But 40 minutes passed, then 60 with no movement. Garrett made a decision he knew Sullivan wouldn't like. He went inside. The emergency waiting room smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. Garrett flashed his credentials at the intake desk, keeping his voice low. "FBI, we have a person of interest who entered your facility approximately 1 hour ago. Female, 32, brunette, beige raincoat. I need to know her status." The nurse, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, checked her computer. "Helen Marsh? She's in examination room 4. Possible ectopic pregnancy. Doctors with her now." Garrett felt a chill. Ectopic pregnancy, when the fertilized egg implants outside the uterus, was potentially life-threatening. Is it serious? Could be. They're doing an ultrasound now. If it's ectopic, she'll need immediate surgery. The nurse studied him. "Is she in some kind of trouble?" "That's classified. I need to maintain visual contact with her." "Sir, she's in a medical examination." "You can't." "Then I wait right here." Garrett positioned himself where he could see examination room 4's door. He radioed the situation to Sullivan, expecting an explosion. Instead, the assistant director's response was measured, almost resigned. "Stay with her. If she needs surgery, we coordinate with hospital security. But Garrett, if she's faking this, if it's an escaped gambit, and we let her walk out of that hospital, careers end. Yours and mine." 2 hours later, a doctor emerged, young, nervous, clearly uncomfortable with the federal presence. "Agent Garrett, I'm Dr. Chun. Your subject is stable. It's not ectopic, but she's experiencing cramping and spotting consistent with threatened miscarriage. She needs bed rest, reduced stress, and monitoring. Can she be moved?" "Medically? Yes, carefully, but I strongly advise against it. Any additional stress could trigger a complete miscarriage." "Is she really a national security threat?" "She seems like a terrified pregnant woman." Garrett said nothing. The doctor's eyes hardened. "I took an oath, Agent. My patient's welfare comes first. I'm admitting her for a 24-hour observation. You can post guards, but you cannot interrogate her, and you cannot remove her without a court order." "Understood." But Garrett's mind was racing. Was this real? The medical symptoms were documented. The doctor believed them. But the timing, just as the extraction window was closing, seemed too convenient. Helen Marsh was moved to a private room on the 4th floor. Garrett stationed agents at both elevator banks and the stairwell exits. At 3 p.m., he finally entered her room. She lay in a hospital bed. For her arm, monitors beeping softly. Her face looked drawn, older than her years. When she saw him, no fear registered in her eyes, only a kind of exhausted resignation. "You're FBI," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Garrett pulled a chair close to the bed, careful to maintain proper distance. "Special Agent Thomas Garrett. We need to talk, Mrs. Marsh. It's Mississippi. I was never married." A bitter smile touched her lips. "And before you ask, yes, I know why you're here. I've known for weeks that I was being watched. Then you know we intercepted your transmission Monday morning." "Of course. That was intentional." She shifted slightly, wincing. "I wanted you to find me." Garrett kept his expression neutral, but his pulse jumped. "Why would you want that?" "Because I'm trapped, Agent Garrett. Trapped between 2 countries, 2 identities, 2 impossible choices. And now, She touched her belly. Now there's a third person to consider. You're admitting you're a Soviet agent. I'm admitting nothing that will hold up in court. No lawyer present. I'm medicated, under duress. Anything I say now is inadmissible. You know this. So let's speak honestly, one human being to another, off the record. Garrett leaned back, considering. She was right. This conversation was worthless as evidence. But intelligence wasn't always about prosecution. Sometimes it was about understanding. All right, off the record. Who are you really? She was silent for a long moment, staring at the ceiling. My real name is Svetlana. I was born in Leningrad in 1930. My father was a Red Army officer who died defending the city during the siege. My mother starved to death in 1942. I was 12 years old. The state raised me, educated me, trained me. The only family I ever knew was the organization that turned me into someone else. The KGB. They don't call it that to our faces. It's just the service. I was identified at 15, good languages, good memory, adaptable personality. They told me I would serve the motherland by living in the enemy's heart, gathering intelligence that would prevent World War III. It sounded noble, necessary. You infiltrated the State Department. You stole classified information. I translated documents and remembered what I saw. Technically, I never removed anything from the building. But yes, I reported what I learned. Soviet troop movements, American diplomatic strategy, NATO planning assessments. Nothing that would directly cause deaths. I have rules, Agent Garrett, even in this work. Those rules didn't stop you from betraying your oath as an American citizen. Her eyes flashed. My oath was a lie. I'm not American. I never was. I'm a ghost, a fiction, a legend created by men in Moscow who never asked what I wanted. She paused, breathing carefully. Until 8 weeks ago, I never questioned it. This was my purpose, my identity. And then I discovered I was pregnant. Who's the father? A State Department analyst. Robert. He's a good man, kind, intelligent, utterly innocent of my real life. We dated for 3 months. He wanted to marry me. Her voice cracked slightly. I couldn't tell him the truth. I couldn't tell anyone. Did you deliberately get pregnant to create an extraction scenario? She laughed, a hollow sound. God, no. It was an accident, a failure of contraception and timing. When I found out, I panicked. I sent an emergency signal to my handler. That's what you intercepted. I needed instructions, extraction, something. The response came back Tuesday. Abort the mission, abort the pregnancy. Return immediately through the established emergency route. Garrett felt cold, and you refused. I refused the second part. I won't kill this child, Agent Garrett. It's the first real thing I've had in 17 years. The first choice that's genuinely mine. My handler said pregnancy made me unreliable, emotionally compromised. He's probably right, but I don't care. So the medical emergency is real. The stress, the fear, the surveillance, it's all threatening the pregnancy. Dr. Chin isn't lying. I could lose this baby at any moment. And part of me wonders if that's what I subconsciously want, for the decision to be taken out of my hands. Garrett studied her carefully. Everything she'd said could be true, or it could be an extraordinary performance designed to manipulate his sympathies. What happens if you go back to Moscow? With a pregnancy and a blown cover? Best case, I'm reassigned to a desk job, raising a child alone while being quietly blamed for the mission failure. Worst case, they decide I'm too compromised, too unreliable. People disappear in the service, Agent Garrett. Even people who serve faithfully for decades. And if you stay here? Federal prison for espionage. My child born in a prison infirmary. Taken away, raised by strangers. Either way, I lose. You could cooperate. Give us intelligence. Name your handlers. Expose the network. We can negotiate. Witness protection. A new identity. A chance for your child to grow up free. She met his eyes, and for the first time, he saw genuine fear. You don't understand how they think. The KGB has long arms and longer memories. If I defect, If I cooperate with you, I'm not just betraying the service. I'm marking my child for death. They would find us eventually. Maybe not this year or next, but someday. An accident, a random crime, a disappearance. They're very patient. We could protect you. Like you protected the Rosenbergs? Like you protected all those others? No, Agent Garrett. There's no safety for people like me. Not here, not there, not anywhere. She closed her eyes, exhausted. I just want to disappear. Completely. Become someone new. Somewhere the Americans and Soviets aren't playing their endless game. But that's impossible now. You found me, and they're coming for me. I'm out of moves. Garrett stood slowly. His instincts warred with his training. Everything in his FBI conditioning told him she was an enemy combatant, a liar, a manipulator. But something in her desperation felt real. Get some rest, Miss Marsh. Or Svetlana. Whoever you are, we'll talk again when you're stronger. There's no time, she said quietly. The extraction window closes tonight. If I don't make contact by midnight, my handler will assume I've been captured. He'll vanish, destroy evidence, and I'll be completely alone. That might be safer for you. Or it might be a death sentence. You don't know these people like I do. She turned to face the window, where rain still fell in gray sheets. Do you have children, Agent Garrett? My wife is 6 months pregnant. Then you understand. You'd do anything to protect that child. Lie, cheat, steal, kill if necessary. That's what makes us human. That fierce, irrational love for our children. It's the one thing your FBI training and my KGB training couldn't eliminate. She touched her belly again. This baby is my one chance at redemption. My one chance to be someone real instead of a manufactured ghost. I can't let anyone take that away. Not you, not them, not anyone. As Garrett left the room, he radioed Sullivan. Sir, we have a problem. She's playing us, but I can't prove it. And if she's telling the truth, then we have a pregnant Soviet spy who wants a defect, but can't, and a KGB handler who's going to make a move tonight to extract or eliminate her. Sullivan's voice was tight. Double the guard. No one in or out of that hospital room without our authorization. And Garrett, if this goes bad, if she escapes, don't expect me to cover for you. Night fell over Washington, and in room 447, Svetlana, Helen Marsh, lay awake, listening to the footsteps of FBI agents pacing the corridor outside. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the faint presence within. She'd told Garrett more truth than she'd intended, but not the whole truth. What she hadn't said was this. The extraction plan was already in motion. The medical emergency wasn't faked, but it had been anticipated, prepared for, weaponized. Her handler had predicted this exact scenario 3 weeks ago. If cornered, he'd said in their last dead drop message, use pregnancy as both shield and weapon. American sentimentality about mothers and children is their greatest vulnerability. Tonight, someone would come, not through the door the FBI was watching, not through any route they'd anticipated. And by morning, Helen Marsh would be gone, and the FBI would be left wondering what was real and what was performance. She closed her eyes, whispering to the child inside her, forgive me for what I'm about to do, but you will be born free. I promise you that, whatever it costs. Outside, thunder rumbled across the Capitol, and lightning illuminated the rain-soaked city, where two empires fought their shadow war, and one woman prepared to sacrifice everything for a chance escape. At 9:47 p.m., the Georgetown University Hospital hummed with its usual control chaos. Nurses completing night rounds, doctors reviewing charts, maintenance staff pushing silent carts through fluorescent corridors. In room 447, Svetlana lay beneath starched white sheets. For Drip Steady, monitors displaying her vital signs to any observer. 2 FBI agents sat outside her door, alert but tired after a 10-hour shift. Another agent monitored the stairwell. A 4th watched the elevator bank. Special Agent Garrett coordinated from a makeshift command post in an unused consultation room on the 3rd floor. All stations, sound off. He spoke quietly into his radio. Stairwell clear. Elevator bank clear. Room 447. Subject sleeping, no change. Ground floor exits covered. Emergency bay secure. Everything looked tight, but Garrett couldn't shake his unease. He'd been awake for 38 hours, running on coffee and adrenaline. His wife, and it called twice, worried. "Come home," she pleaded. "You look exhausted." But he couldn't. Not tonight. Tonight, something was going to happen. He felt it in his bones. At 10:23 p.m., the first domino fell. A genuine medical emergency 3 floors down. An elderly patient suffering cardiac arrest pulled 2 nurses away from their stations, including the one assigned to monitor room 447's medical equipment remotely. Standard protocol. Nothing suspicious. At 10:31 p.m., a maintenance worker arrived on the 4th floor to fix a reported electrical fault in the nurse's station. He wore hospital coveralls, carried proper identification, and matched the description provided by the building's services supervisor. The FBI agents barely glanced at him. At 10:45 p.m., Agent Morrison at the stairwell door stepped away for 90 seconds to use the restroom at the far end of the corridor. Just 90 seconds. In his 3 years with the Bureau, nothing had ever happened in 90 seconds. At 10:47 p.m., the lights on the 4th floor flickered once, twice, then stabilized. The electrical fault, apparently minor. At 10:52 p.m., Dr. Chen arrived to check on his patient. Exactly as scheduled, exactly as he'd done every 3 hours throughout the day. The agents outside room 447 verified his identification and let him pass. He entered alone as doctors do and closed the door. Inside, Svetlana opened her eyes. The man who stood beside her bed was not Dr. Chun. He was older, perhaps 50, with gray hair and a lined face that could have belonged to any physician in any hospital in America. He spoke in Russian, his voice barely a whisper. "Vesna, Vesna, you must wake now." She sat up carefully, still connected to 4. "Dmitri, we have less than 6 minutes. Can you walk?" "Yes, but how?" No time for explanations. Listen carefully. He produced a syringe from his medical bag, injecting something into her 4-line. "This will cause your monitors to show gradual deterioration, declining heart rate, blood pressure drop. In 3 minutes, the nurse's station will receive an automated alert. When staff respond, we move. There's a maintenance access corridor behind the bathroom. It connects to the service elevator. I have an ambulance waiting at the loading dock. The FBI is everywhere. I know. That's why we're not trying to sneak past them. We're hiding you in plain sight." He pulled off his white coat, revealing hospital scrubs underneath. From his bag, he produced a surgical mask and cap. "You're a pregnant patient being rushed to emergency surgery. I'm your surgeon. The FBI is looking for an escaping spy, not a medical emergency. They'll verify with hospital staff. By the time they do, you'll be in international waters." He helped her disconnect the monitoring leads, replacing them with a portable device that would continue transmitting false readings for several more minutes. "There's a Soviet freighter 20 miles off Hampton Roads. We'll have you aboard before dawn." Svetlana swung her legs off the bed, testing her stability. The cramping was real, the bleeding was real, but adrenaline overrode the discomfort. What about Dr. Chen? The real one, currently treating the cardiac patient 3 floors down. By the time he finishes, we'll be gone. Dmitri glanced at his watch. 2 minutes. Put these on. She dressed quickly in the hospital gown and robe he provided, pulling the surgical mask over her face. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a frightened patient, not a fleeing spy. Good. The monitors began their carefully programmed decline. Heart rate, 72, 68, 64. Blood pressure, 118/75, 110/68, 102/60. At the nurse's station, an alarm chimed. The charged nurse glanced at her screen, eyes widening. Room 447, crash cart, possible hemorrhagic shock. Everything happened exactly as Dmitri had orchestrated. Nurses rushed toward room 447. The FBI agents, trained to recognize security threats but not medical emergencies, stepped aside as hospital staff flooded past. In controlled chaos, no one noticed a surgeon wheeling a patient toward the service corridor, moving with urgent but professional haste. Subject in distress. Agent Parker shouted into his radio. Medical emergency. Multiple staff responding. Garrett was already running, taking stairs 3 at a time. Lock it down. No one in or out until I verify. But by the time he burst on the 4th floor, the real Dr. Chun had just arrived, looking confused. What's happening? I was told my patient. Where is she? Garrett pushed past into room 447. Empty bed. Disconnected monitors. Window sealed. No other exit except the bathroom. Agent Morrison kicked open the door. A maintenance access panel hung open, revealing darkness beyond. She's in the walls. Garrett grabbed his radio. All units. Subject is breach containment. Service corridors, loading docks, basement. Move now. But it was already too late. The service elevator descended to the basement loading area, where an ambulance idled with lights flashing, a perfect replica of the hospital's own vehicles, down to the unit number and registration. Dmitri helped Svetlana into the back, closing the doors as the driver accelerated smoothly away from the dock. Federal agents are responding. The driver said in Russian, they'll have roadblocks up within minutes. Then we don't take the roads. Dmitri opened a cabinet, pulling out clean clothes. Change quickly. In 10 minutes, we'll transfer to a laundry truck. After that, a diplomatic vehicle from the embassy, but only to cross the city limits. Then another transfer to a private boat. The Americans are expecting us to run for the embassy or an airport. We're doing neither. Svetlana changed mechanically, her mind racing. They'll close the ports. The Coast Guard. We'll be looking for a pregnant woman traveling alone or with obvious Soviet contacts. You're about to become Svetlana Maximova, Russian diplomatic staffer with proper credentials and diplomatic immunity. The boat that will carry us is registered to a front company in Panama, staffed by Americans who have no idea who they're really working for. By morning, you'll be aboard the MV Komsomolsk, a Soviet freighter in international waters, and there's nothing the Americans can do about it. Unless they decide I'm worth an international incident. Dmitri met her eyes. That's the risk we're all taking tonight. At the hospital, Garrett stood in the service corridor, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The access tunnel led to multiple branches, heating ducts, electrical runs, maintenance passages. A perfect escape route, hidden in plain sight. How did they know? Agent Parker stood beside him, face ashen. How did they know this passage existed? Because they planned this weeks ago, Garrett said quietly. Maybe months. They knew we'd find her eventually. They knew we'd put her under surveillance. They knew we'd concentrate our forces around the obvious exits. So they created a medical crisis, used our own protective instincts against us, and walked her out during the controlled chaos of an emergency response. Sir, what do we do? Garrett was already moving. Alert every law enforcement agency within 100 miles. FBI, state police, Coast Guard, Customs. Roadblocks on every highway out of Washington. Harbor patrols in the Potomac and Chesapeake. And get me the names of every Soviet diplomatic vehicle and every foreign freighter currently in American waters. Sullivan's voice crackled over the radio. Garrett, tell me you still have her. She's in the wind, sir. Professional extraction, perfectly timed. They've been planning this for her. I don't want to hear it. Find her. If a pregnant Soviet spy walks out of the city under FBI surveillance, heads will roll, starting with yours. But even as Garrett coordinated the massive manhunt, he knew the truth. They were chasing shadows. Whoever had planned this extraction was a master tradecraft, someone who understood American procedures, American psychology, American vulnerabilities. They'd turned the FBI's own thoroughness against them, using the Bureau's protocols as camouflage. At 11:43 p.m., a laundry truck approached the Potomac crossing near Alexandria. The driver, a 60-year-old immigrant from Poland who'd worked for Ambassador Laundry Services for 12 years, had no idea that the diplomatic pouches loaded among the hospital linens contained a human being. At 12:17 a.m., A black Cadillac with diplomatic plates drove sedately through a police checkpoint on Route 301, heading toward the Maryland coast. The officer checked the credentials, Soviet trade mission staff, diplomatic immunity, and waved them through. He never looked in the trunk, where Svetlana lay in a specially designed compartment that even drug-sniffing dogs couldn't detect. At 1:34 a.m., a 30-foot cabin cruiser departed from a private dock near St. Mary's City, Maryland. The manifest listed 3 American recreational fishermen heading out for early morning rockfish. The Coast Guard cutter that stopped them found exactly that: 3 middle-aged men with fishing licenses, coolers of beer, and legitimate registrations. They never searched the forward cabin, where Svetlana hid in a space no larger than a coffin, breathing through a concealed vent, her hand pressed against her belly as the boat rocked on dark water. At 3:02 a.m., 23 miles offshore in international waters, the cabin cruiser rendezvoused with the MV Komsomolsk, a Soviet freighter ostensibly carrying grain to Cuba. The transfer took less than 4 minutes. By the time the American fishermen turned back toward shore, pockets heavy with cash, mouths closed by equal parts greed and fear, Svetlana was aboard a Soviet vessel, beyond American jurisdiction, beyond American reach. In the captain's cabin, she finally allowed herself to break down, tears streaming silently as Dmitri poured her tea laced with something to calm her shaking hands. "You're safe now," he said. "In 48 hours, we'll be in Havana. From there, a diplomatic flight to Moscow. You'll be debriefed, reassigned, and your child will be born in the motherland." "Will I?" She looked up, eyes red. "Be safe, I mean? After failing the mission, after becoming compromised?" Dmitri's silence was answer enough. "I bought your life with this escape," he finally said. "But lives in our service always come with a price. You know this." She did. God help her, she did. As dawn broke over the Atlantic, Special Agent Garrett stood on the Coast Guard cutter, binoculars trained on the distant silhouette of the Soviet freighter, now 35 miles out and accelerating. He'd failed, despite all the surveillance, all the manpower, all the preparation. She'd slipped through his fingers like water. "Sir, orders?" the Coast Guard commander asked. "Let her go," Garrett said quietly. "She's beyond our reach now." But as he watched the freighter disappear into morning haze, he couldn't shake one final question. Had she really escaped? Or had she simply traded one prison for another, swapping American justice for Soviet mercy, neither of which offered any real freedom? And what would happen to the child she carried, born into a life of secrets and lies, another pawn in the endless Cold War game? The ocean offered no answers, only the sound of waves and the distant call of gulls, indifferent to human dramas played out on its surface. The MV Komsomolsk cut through gray Atlantic swells, its rusted hull bearing Cyrillic letters that spelled out a lie. The vessel was registered as a commercial grain transport, but the sophisticated radio equipment hidden in its hold, the sealed compartments below the waterline, and the specially trained crew members told a different story. This was a KGB extraction vessel, one of several that prowled international waters, ready to recover agents when operations collapsed. In a cramped cabin below deck, Svetlana sat on a narrow bunk, the smell of diesel fuel and salt water permeating everything. It had been 36 hours since the escape. The morning sickness had returned with a vengeance, compounded by the ship's motion and her frayed nerves. She'd vomited twice already today. Dmitri entered without knocking, carrying a metal tray with weak tea and dry bread. "You need to eat. The ship's doctor says you're dehydrated." "The ship's doctor knows I'm pregnant?" Alarm flared in her chest. "He's one of us. Discretion is part of his training." Dmitri set down the tray. "We'll reach Havana in 18 hours. From there, an Aeroflot flight to Moscow, with a fuel stop in Shannon, Ireland. Total travel time, approximately 50 hours. Can you manage? Do I have a choice?" He studied her with those cold, professional eyes that betrayed nothing. "There are always choices, Vesna. The question is whether you can live with the consequences." She forced down a piece of bread, her stomach rebelling. "What happens when I reach Moscow?" Standard debriefing at Yasenivo headquarters. 3 to 5 days of interviews. Your mission activities, your compromise, the FBI's techniques. After that, medical evaluation and assignment to a secure facility until your pregnancy concludes. And after the child is born, Dimitri's pause was almost imperceptible. Almost. That depends on the debriefing results. I won't give up my baby. She heard the steel in her own voice, surprising herself. That was never part of the agreement. There was no agreement. Vesna, you signaled an emergency extraction. We responded, but you violated protocol by becoming pregnant. You violated operational security by allowing emotional attachment to compromise your judgment. These are serious failures that require serious consequences. I gave you 17 years. 17 years of my life, my identity, my soul. I'm done being Vesna. I'm done being Helen Marsh. From now on, I'm just Svetlana, a woman trying to raise a child in peace. Peace. Dimitri smiled without humor. There is no peace for people like us. You know this. The service doesn't grant retirements. It grants reassignments or it grants silence. He leaned forward, voice dropping. I saved your life in Washington. I risked my own network, burned 2 valuable assets, and spent resources will take years to replace. The center expects a return on that investment. What do you want from me? Information, names, details about FBI counterintelligence procedures. Everything you learned during your capture, their surveillance techniques, their weaknesses, their agents. And after you deliver, you'll be assigned to training new illegals. Your experience makes you valuable as an instructor. I want out. Completely out. Impossible. You know too much. Even if we trusted you, which we don't, the Americans will hunt you for the rest of your life. Your only safety is within the service, under our protection. Svetlana felt the walls closing in, the cabin suddenly too small, the air too thin. She'd traded American imprisonment for Soviet control, and the price was becoming clear. And my child will be raised in a secure facility with other children of service families, properly educated, properly indoctrinated, perhaps in time, properly trained. No, the word came out flat, final. My child will not become what I became. Dimitri stood, his patience clearly exhausted. You're not thinking clearly. The pregnancy hormones, the stress, they're affecting your judgment. Rest. We'll discuss this further in Moscow, when you've had time to accept reality. After he left, Svetlana lay on the bunk, staring at the rust-stained ceiling. She'd been a fool to think escape was possible. The KGB didn't let people go. They either used you until you broke, or they silenced you permanently. Her child will be taken, raised by the state, turned into another weapon in the endless ideological war. Unless a desperate plan began forming in her mind. Dangerous, possibly suicidal. But what did she have to lose? At midnight, the ship's radio operator received an encrypted message from Moscow Center. He decoded it carefully, then knocked on Dimitri's cabin door. Sir, priority communication from the deputy director. Dimitri read the decoded text, his expression darkening. When did this arrive? 20 minutes ago. I verified the authentication codes twice. The message was brief. Subject Vesna classified high-risk defection probability. Upon arrival Havana, transfer to secured custody. Medical evaluation will determine pregnancy viability. Operational security takes precedence over humanitarian considerations. Acknowledge receipt. In bureaucratic language, it was a death warrant. The center had decided Svetlana was too compromised, too unstable, too dangerous to remain operational. Determine pregnancy viability meant exactly what it sounded like. Her pregnancy would be terminated, and she would be permanently detained or eliminated. Dimitri sat in his cabin for a long time, smoking cigarettes and wrestling with his conscience, a weakness he'd thought long since buried. He'd served the KGB for 32 years. He'd executed orders without question, sacrificed assets without hesitation, done terrible things in the name of Soviet security. But something about this particular order troubled him. Perhaps it was because he'd watched Svetlana grow from a teenage recruit into one of their finest illegals. Perhaps it was because he remembered his own daughter, lost in pneumonia at age 6, and saw something of her in Svetlana's desperate desire to protect her child. Or perhaps he was simply getting old, soft, sentimental, all the weaknesses the service trained him to eliminate. At 2:15 a.m., he descended to Svetlana's cabin. She was awake, as he'd known she would be. "We need to talk," he said quietly, "and you need to listen very carefully without interrupting." He told her about the message from Moscow. He watched the color drain from her face, saw her hand instinctively move to her belly. Then he said something he'd never thought he would say. "There's a lifeboat on the port side, aft section. In 4 hours, we'll be approximately 80 miles from the Virginia coast. The Gulf Stream flows northeast at this point. If you're in the water, you'll drift towards shipping lanes. American Coast Guard patrols that area regularly." She stared at him. "You're suggesting I abandon ship?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm simply providing information, as I would to any agent assessing tactical options." He pulled a small waterproof bag from his jacket. "Emergency rations, first aid supplies, flares, and $5,000 in American currency. Also, a contact number in New York. Someone who can provide documents. No questions asked." "Why are you doing this?" "Because I'm tired, Svetlana. Tired of sending young people to their deaths. Tired of the lies we tell ourselves about service and sacrifice. Tired of what we become." He set the bag on her bunk. "Or maybe I'm just a sentimental old fool. Either way, in 4 hours, I'll be in the radio room. The deck watch changes at 0600. There's a 7-minute gap when the aft section is unmonitored. They'll know you helped me. They'll suspect. But I've served long enough to have protections. I'll claim you overpowered me, stole the supplies. They'll investigate, but they won't act against a 30-year veteran without absolute proof." He moved toward the door, then paused. "If you do this, you'll be hunted by both sides. The KGB will want you dead to protect their secrets. The FBI will want you alive for the same reason. You'll never truly be safe. I haven't been safe since I was 12 years old." She picked up the waterproof bag. "At least this way, my child has a chance." At 5:58 a.m., as the first gray light touched the eastern horizon, Svetlana climbed into the lifeboat. Her hands shook as she worked the release mechanism Dmitri had explained. The boat dropped toward the dark water, hitting with a splash that seemed impossibly loud. She rowed away from the freighter, arms burning with effort, watching the ship's lights recede into the pre-dawn gloom. After 30 minutes, she couldn't row anymore. She deployed the small sea anchor Dmitri had included, letting the current take her, and settled into wait. The sun rose slowly, revealing endless ocean in all directions. She was alone, pregnant, hunted, with no guarantee of rescue. But she was also, for the first time in 17 years, choosing her own path. Whatever happened next, death from exposure, capture by either side, or the unlikely possibility of genuine freedom, it would be her choice. At 8:23 a.m., a Coast Guard cutter on routine patrol spotted a lifeboat. The crew recovered a dehydrated, hypothermic pregnant woman who kept repeating one phrase in accented English. "I want to speak to the FBI. I want to speak to Special Agent Thomas Garrett." By noon, Garrett stood in a Virginia hospital room, staring at the woman who'd outsmarted his surveillance, escaped his custody, and apparently thrown herself off a Soviet ship. "Why?" he asked simply. Svetlana looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. "Because between two impossible choices, I chose a third option. I chose my child." She paused. "I have information, names, dates, methods, everything I know about Soviet intelligence operations in America. I'll trade it all for 3 things: immunity from prosecution, witness protection, and a guarantee that my baby will be born free. The Justice Department will want. I know what they'll want, but I also know what I have. 17 years of embedded intelligence operations, the identities of at least 40 Soviet assets currently operating in the United States, details of KGB recruitment and training methods, and most importantly, information about a planned operation that could compromise American nuclear weapon security." Garrett felt cold. "You're not bluffing." "I never bluff, Agent Garrett. That's why I stayed alive so long." She shifted in the hospital bed. I don't expect trust. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect kindness. But I do expect a deal. My knowledge for my freedom and my child's future. Over the following weeks, the debriefing revealed that Svetlana had been holding back her most valuable intelligence throughout her career. Insurance against exactly the situation. Her information led to the arrest of 3 Soviet illegals, the disruption of 2 active espionage networks, and the closure of a security breach at Los Alamos that could have compromised American nuclear weapons designs. The Justice Department wanted a public trial. The State Department wanted her used as leverage in diplomatic negotiations. The CIA wanted to turn her into a double agent. But in the end, a quiet deal was struck. Full immunity in exchange for complete cooperation, followed by permanent relocation under a new identity. On March 15, 1963, in a private hospital in Wisconsin, Svetlana gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Catherine, an English name, an American name, a name with no connection to her Soviet past. Special Agent Garrett attended the birth, partly out of duty, partly out of something he couldn't quite name. As he watched the former spy hold her newborn daughter, tears streaming down her face, he understood something about the Cold War that no training manual had taught him. That even in a world divided by ideology and fear, the most powerful force was still a mother's love for her child. "She'll grow up free," Svetlana whispered to her baby. "No secrets, no lies, no service to anyone but herself. That's my gift to you, the freedom I never had." Garrett stepped outside, breathing cold Wisconsin air. The case would officially remain unsolved, a Soviet spy who escaped FBI custody, only to vanish without a trace. Let Moscow and Washington wonder what had really happened. Let both side bureaucrats write their reports and protect their careers. The truth was simpler and more profound. One woman had chosen love over loyalty, freedom over safety, and in doing so, had broken every rule of the game both sides pretended was worth playing. 20 years later, Catherine would graduate from the University of Chicago, having no idea that her mother had once been a Soviet spy, or that she'd been born from one woman's desperate gamble for redemption. She would become a teacher, marry a good man, raise her own children in peace, living the normal, honest life her mother had sacrificed everything to give her. And somewhere in a small Montana town, a woman who'd been born Svetlana and become Helen Marsh, and finally settled into being Sarah Mitchell, would sometimes stand on her porch at sunset, watching her daughter play, and whisper words in Russian that no one else could hear. "I kept my promise. You were born free. The price was worth it." The Cold War would rage on for another 28 years, claiming countless lives in its ideological deadlock. But in the end, some victories were too small and too human to appear in any history book. A child born free, a mother who chose love over duty, and one FBI agent who learned that sometimes the greatest act of patriotism was knowing when to let justice take a different form. The files on Operation Vesna remained sealed for 50 years. When they were finally declassified in 2013, most of the principals were dead, but one retired special agent, by then 82 years old, read the documents with tears in his eyes, remembering a pregnant spy who'd been brave enough to choose her own ending. And somewhere in Montana, a grandmother named Sarah Mitchell smiled, knowing that some secrets were worth keeping, and some escapes were worth celebrating, even if no one would ever know the whole truth. The Cold War was a story of nations and ideologies, missiles and treaties, victories and defeats. But it was also a story of individuals making impossible choices in impossible circumstances, and sometimes, just sometimes, choosing love over fear, hope over despair, and freedom over everything else.